In today's video, I'm going to be installing headers, and I'm going to be giving you some tips on when you install your headers. So what I have here is the RACELAND 4-2-1 headers. The difference between 4-2-1 and 4-1 headers, the 4-2-1 is supposedly supposed to have more power in the early and mid-range RPM, while a 4-1 is going to have a higher max horsepower output, but the power is going to be in the upper RPM ranges. But I got a pretty good deal on these headers. RACELAND actually doesn't make them anymore or provide them anymore, so I got a second hand from somebody else that didn't install it or just had one. So I got a pretty good deal on it, and so I decided, hey, why not? You know, let's see if the exhaust headers really do make a difference, and maybe it will kind of decide whether I do a supercharger or a turbocharger in the future, or just a really strong NA build. But here is the headers right here. Some of the issues that I have with it is the welding is pretty nice, but some of the spots are a little spacey, so we'll see how it performs against maybe a higher name brand one. I think these used to sell for about $150, so that's a crazy good deal. Like, you know, unfortunately they don't make it anymore, but maybe there's somewhere else where you can find those kind of headers. But the welds are pretty nice on the outside, but for the most part, the whole header system is kind of a pop into place and then weld on each of those sections. So whether that's good or bad, maybe if it causes turbulence on the internal side, I don't know. I guess we'll find out. So I did do a couple 0 to 60 runs with my stock headers, and I'll show those images of the times there. It wasn't really anything super high tech. It was just an app on my iPhone, but I believe it uses satellite, so it will at least gauge or at least show a difference when I do it with this header. So there are bolts here, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 bolts. They're 14 millimeter. They should be torqued to around 30 to 34 foot-pound, but yeah, so you take those bolts off, you disconnect the EGR tube, which is located right here on this third exhaust area, and then the O2 sensor, and disconnect it from the catalytic converter underneath your car. I didn't have any issues with the O2 sensor wire. There's plenty of slack on mine, so I didn't have to deal with that at all. And it screwed in just fine. My main issue was the EGR tube. So RACELAND specifically has noted and said before that you do have to make modifications to the EGR tube, mainly because the EGR tube points down a little bit more while the exhaust header has their little port, and they don't line up. And if you don't have those lining up perfectly, then it won't work. So what I ended up doing is I fully disconnected the EGR tube on the other side, on the intake side, and took the whole EGR tube out to bend it, and that took a lot of work. You had to do a little bit of bending, test fit, come back, and keep doing that over and over, and that took a really long time. That was probably the hardest part of this whole thing, honestly. But a tip would be to loosen the bolts on the header, or on the intake side, so it has a little bit of wiggle room, and then you can kind of bend the EGR bolt to where you need to on the headers. So yeah, we got those on. I didn't have any issues with the O2 sensor, no issues with connection to the catalytic converter, but actually getting the header into that area was really tight. Now it's okay, there's plenty of space. It's not touching or rubbing against anything here. Not that I can see, at least, but yeah, so there's no issues here. There's a little bit, it's really close to the body. It's probably about like half an inch away from touching that, but at least like really far down in there, but that's nothing that's an issue, nothing that will cause damage. But fitment wise, when you're actually getting it in, it has to go to the right. It has to go to the further to the driver's side a little bit more, and so it kind of touches the steering shaft. So I ended up having to get like a plastic mallet just to get it down, because it was hitting the valve cover. You can probably see all the scratches I have on the valve cover. You know, it is what it is. But yeah, I just used a rubber mallet. Don't use a metal hammer to just kind of push it down. And I had somebody else guide underneath so that it came through as well. But yeah, overall it was about a 6 to 9 hour, you know, effort work day, I guess. Mainly because that EGR2 was just so hard to get to, and it was just difficult leaning over. But half of that was a little bit of working with, you know, some of the bolts that were rusted. But if everything comes off easy, it should be pretty straightforward. But my thing when I was working on these headers is, in the past I've seen a lot of people do open headers. I've seen them, you know, they look cool. It kind of shows, you know, yeah, it's not just a stock header situation. It looks shiny. As you can see, I did drive it a little bit. It's starting to show the coloration. It was originally just a stainless steel look, but now, you know, once it starts running, it'll kind of get bluish and purple, which is really cool. But my main issue is I melted my airbox. I did not get it right. So I did this beforehand as a safety precaution. I put some heat tape over this part, touched it, and it melted it. Luckily, there's only a small little hole that actually went through. But yeah, you gotta protect it. If you don't have some sort of aftermarket intake or some situation that kind of puts your airbox either further away, you gotta figure something out. And my situation, I do like the stock airbox. I don't see any issues with it. I'm having kind of I'm trying to decide whether to do a inline air filter or not. But the K&N filter, I know it's really good. I've already talked about it in another video. But what I'm getting at is I ended up getting a heat shield. So I got the Track Dog Racing heat shield, which is about 150 bucks. Kind of a bummer. It is pretty pricey for what it is, but it is a must-have. I initially thought, I guess I'll just save money on that. It will look cool to see the headers, but in the long run, it's going to cause some damage if you don't protect that area. All those plastic components inside your engine bay are just going to get melted. So I'm going to be installing this. We're going to talk about how to do it and kind of form it. So we'll start going on to the install. It's possible to make your own heat shield. This is probably a mix of a harder, almost aluminum, and another, I'm not sure what kind of material the outside is, but I'm pretty sure it's a couple layers of fiberglass on the inside, which is similar to the original OEM heat shield. It's not much, actually the OEM heat shield is a lot thinner than this. The only difference is through the whole system of the old headers, it kind of has a little bit of a heat shield rather than just on the part that's right here in the engine bay. So we'll see if the temps actually help, but my main thing is to protect that airbox so that we don't have any melting or any other issues there. So if you come here, I'll show you what we have to do. What we're gonna have to do is we're gonna put L brackets right here on this stud, right here, and on this one. And then once we do that, we'll screw it on here and kind of form this towards it. Track Dog Racing says that air is the best insulator, which it is. And so the looser fit, the more efficient it will be. Don't have it touching super tight on your headers because there's no air insulating that and keeping the exhaust heat down. And you also need those headers to breathe, just so you don't get that damage. So keep that in mind when you're doing that. When you do get this, and if you decide to put it on your OEM heat shield, you'll connect it here, and then you'll have to drill your own holes right here for that. So I'm gonna take those two bolts off, and then we'll get those L brackets on. Put the bolts on, or the L brackets on after taking the bolts off. So I'm Let me get those out really quick. And these go onto the studs. These are already drilled and tapped for these other bolts that come provided with their kit. This middle one is where you do the self-tapping on that OEM heat shield. But yeah, so we'll just stick these on with these bolts and then get that reinstalled again. So I'm just gonna get this so it's on first. You want to have it just a little bit loose so that you can adjust for the actual installation. I know you're probably watching this and saying, why is he doing it like that? Why are the studs still on there? Well, it's because the bolts were rusted onto the actual studs. So just a tip I would say is to make sure you get those studs on beforehand. Mine isn't really the best example of what's going on. Okay. So overall, not too hard, but we'll get that torque down now. Get my torque wrench. Wrapped around. So make sure it's clean. We're gonna have to basically form it. What we do is we'll tuck this side underneath first on top of the headers and make sure that this is in between the header and any of those plastic rubber lines. Yeah, that's the main thing you want to protect. Same thing with this side. See if this actually fits. The main issue I was running into was the fact that my strut tower bracing was kind of pushing the header closer. Again, it's probably still gonna touch, at least for this one, but I mainly just didn't want actual direct contact. This hard plastic is pretty heat resistant. But if it's up against the headers, you can only do so much. So let me install everything again, and then I'll start it up and you can kind of hear what the headers sound like. I have an old video of what it used to sound like, so we can kind of do a comparison on the two and see what you guys think. I've already driven this a little bit, and I think there is a little bit of a difference in the exhaust note. So maybe you guys can tell me what you think. So now we have everything installed, the headers and the heat shield. Like I said, I would highly suggest getting some sort of a heat shield. It doesn't have to be the Track Dog Racing. You can maybe figure out how to do your own, but it's pretty easy to do it yourself with the Track Dog Racing. So yeah, let me start it up, see what you guys think. I'll also do some 0 to 60 runs with that app again to kind of compare if the headers actually did anything. But my gut feeling is it does feel peppier in the lower to mid-range RPM. It feels faster. It sounds a little bit more raspy. It's not a crazy change to the exhaust, but it is a noticeable change. I can kind of tell. So hopefully this will give you some advice and some tips on how to install the headers and some tips on when you're installing those. So let me get that started and you can hear those. Okay, so hopefully those sound clips kind of helped. I think it sounds a little bit more pure, if that makes sense. It doesn't have a little bit of lag. It feels like it revs up faster and I guess falls off faster. So all in all, I think it's a good thing. So hopefully those tips will help you out, and I'll see you in the next video.